Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and before we get into today's video, let me quickly address this arm and this bandage. I basically have inflamed tendons in my wrist because the past 2 days I spent helping a friend of mine put together IKEA furniture because they moved, and I was screwing too many screws with a non-electric screwdriver by hand. And yeah, so now my tendons are inflamed and I put some cream on it, I bandaged it so I don't move the wrist too much and make it worse and everything. And the only bandage I had was really long, hence why it looks massive. But yeah, that's this out of the way, and now let's get into today's video, which once again is a review. Also, I'm sorry I didn't upload on Sunday, I was lazy again. I don't know what's up with me currently. It's whatever. But today's review is The Winter of the Witch. No, not The Winter of the Witch. The Winternight Trilogy by Katherine Arden. This I read back in February, so it's been quite a while since I read this, but I only got around to reviewing it now because, first of all, I am now uploading less. There were also a few weeks where I didn't upload on Sunday at all. And I had quite a few reviews to film until now and still have quite a few reviews to film in the future. So you'll still get reviews until at least like every week until at least June, I think, mid-June probably. But yeah, anyway, The Winternight Trilogy by Katherine Arden is a historical fantasy trilogy inspired by Russian history and Russian folklore. It consists of The Bear and the Nightingale, which is the first book, The Girl in the Tower, which is the second book, and The Winter of the Witch, which is the third book, and hence why the confusion with the trilogy name. And yeah, this is an adult historical fantasy series. I think it's technically officially shelved as an adult series. However, I think it is one of those series that very well is like along the border of YA to adult, where readers from both age genres will enjoy this series and I think can read this. And yeah, so let's now get into the review. I won't have my usual, framing of negative and then positive things, because most of the negative things are in connection to positive things, and most of the negative things are actually things that I thought were very positive in the first book, because that's my main criticism of the series as a whole generally. I very much enjoyed the first book. I would give it, if I were to rate books this year, a 4 to 4.5 stars, which, I mean, I guess some authors don't think that's a good rating, but it's a good rating. And then the second and the third book, while I still enjoyed them and still pretty much, read each of the books in one sitting and read them very quickly, I would give them like a 3 to 3.5 star rating. And the reason for that is that the first book very much for me feels like a retelling. I don't think it's a direct retelling of any Russian legends or fairy tales or Russian mythology, although I have to say I'm not well versed enough in Russian mythology to be able to say that 100%. But whether it is directly inspired or not, it just has these elements of like retellings that I very much enjoy. And whenever I talk about retellings, I talk about one thing mainly, and that for me retellings are books where I very much enjoy if the characters are a bit stereotypical, if the characters are tropey, if there's a very heavy leaning onto, classical fairy tale tropes. And that very much is the case in the first book. And the first book for me also very much, just in general feels like a fairy tale. And it feels like, like you're in this Russian winter fairy tale. I don't know how else to describe it. And so I really, really enjoyed that. And with that comes a villain that is a little bit stereotypical, actually two villains that are a little bit stereotypical that I very much enjoyed in the first book, where I just enjoyed how kind of evil they were, but a good kind of evil. It also comes with a main character who very much is a very typical untamed maiden type character, which I very much enjoyed. It comes with side characters that don't play a very important role, that you see very little of. You have one side character that's kind of, the crone storyteller, type of trope. You have the brother, or a few brothers actually, that don't play a big role, that you barely see at all, that don't have a lot of character, and so on. And I very much enjoyed that in this book. I enjoyed that aside from Vazia, actually most of the characters, I mean, the villain did have a lot of character in the first book, but most of the side characters, they're not very three-dimensional. They're very two-dimensional. They have the roles, they play those roles, and so on. But because this book felt like a retelling, I absolutely did not mind that. However, when it came to the second and third book, while both books were still very enjoyable to me, those same elements that I enjoyed so much in the first book kind of made the second and third book a little bit dull to read and a little bit repetitive to read. And I felt like maybe this book would have worked best as a standalone instead of a trilogy, because it felt like the story just repeated itself, because you had Vazia, who had to learn things and whatever, and she was the untamed maiden once again, and so on. Actually, in the third book, her character does change quite a bit, and I did enjoy her development in the third book. But in the second book especially, her character wasn't that different from the first book. She was still our headstrong main character. The main villain kind of, I think, not the main villain, but like one of the main villains kind of started lacking interest for me in the second and third book. I thought he became more and more stereotypical and kind of not mustache twirling type of villain, but you know, evil Christian priest type of villain, because that's literally what he is. He became a lot more stereotypical in that way, and I felt that he lacked a lot of the depth that he had in the first book, in the second and in the third book. I thought that when you have a whole trilogy, it's a lot more important to also not just have an interesting main character, but also interesting side characters. And I thought a few of the side characters, just like most of the side characters actually, just really didn't catch my attention. So I thought that was kind of, you know, disappointing a little bit. However, I did still enjoy both of these books. It's just that a lot of things that I enjoyed very much in the first book became repetitive in the second and third book. And that made these two books actually also feel a lot more YA rather than adult novels, where the first book kind of feels like this type of ageless fairy tale and kind of very traditional fairy tale type story. As a lot of you might know, if you read fairy tales, like original fairy tales, Grimm fairy tales, you will know, like, not that Grimm are the only original fairy tale. You might know that, you know, fairy tales weren't originally intended for children. Fairy tales really were stories for everyone. And that's what this first book feels like. So yeah, that's as far as the whole trilogy goes. But now let me get a bit more into the characters, into the plot, and so on. As far as the plot goes, I actually enjoyed that it got more complex as the story went on. The first book very much has a very simple, straightforward plot, and with a retelling, I don't mind that. I love that. But the second and third plot, you got like more kind of story lines, story arcs that came together and so on. I really enjoyed that. Especially in the third book, we get more POVs from more different characters, which I also really enjoyed. Although I think in the third book there were a bit too many story beats for this rather short book. Then, aside from that, the characters. I already talked about Vazia. I very much enjoyed Vazia as a character. She's very much a tropey, typical character. However, I still enjoyed reading about her. I didn't enjoy her as much in the second book, I gotta be honest. But I very much understood her. I very much understood her frustration about always being, you know, caught and always having to do what others expect of you. So, you know, her storyline, her story arc, her character arc is a very typical one, but it's just a classic for a reason, you know, the headstrong young woman. So I did love that. I also love the whole maiden and the death part of the story. I mean, it's technically not really death, but maiden and the Winter King part of the storyline, but you know, I just love it when you have a storyline that follows this type of trope of the maiden plus a personification of a natural disaster. It's not a disaster, but like a natural force. That was the word I was looking for. I very much enjoy that type of storyline. I very much enjoy, you know, following the story of the maiden and then this personification of the natural force who through contact with the maiden becomes more and more human. I also really enjoyed that in Gods of Jade and Shadow, and I think in here it's really well done as well. And oh my god, that scene in the first book, if you have read the series, like, so good. The bathhouse scene, I absolutely love it. But yeah, so I enjoyed a lot of things about this series, but also I found it overall as a series to be very repetitive. However, what I can definitely say is that I would recommend picking up the first book. I think the first book also works very well as a standalone. I don't think you necessarily have to continue on with the second and third book. You can, of course, if you want, but as I said, I think it works very well as a standalone. And I think overall it's a series I would recommend you pick up and read and, you know, just get lost in the fairy tale of Russian icy winter nights, I guess. But yeah, my camera is flashing, so that is it already for this review. But as a whole, I would highly recommend this series, especially the first book. As I said, if you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving it a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. Leave your comments down below on your thoughts if you have read this series. Leave your thoughts down below in the comments if you have read this series. That's how I wanted to say it. All links to my social media are in the description box down below, so go and check those out. All the links to my book club are also in the description box down below, so go and check those out as well. We're reading one adult high fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month. And yeah, with all of that said, I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!